August 17th, 1944. 05:45 hours. Village of Saint-Pierre-sur-Loire, Normandy, France. Marie Dubois woke to a sound she'd almost forgotten. Distant thunder that wasn't weather. For 4 years, the only thunder in Saint-Pierre had been German trucks rolling through the square. Boots on cobblestones, orders shouted in harsh voices that made every French ear ache with helpless resentment. But this sound was different. Mechanical. Organized. Coming from the west, not the east, where the Germans occupied. She rose from bed in the pre-dawn darkness, careful not to wake her daughter Sophie sleeping beside her. 7 years old, born into a world where swastikas flew from the Mary, and German was the language of power. Marie crept to the window, pulled back the blackout curtain just enough to see the village square below. Empty. No German sentries, no patrol vehicles. The occupation headquarters that had been staffed continuously for 4 years showed no lights, no movement. The Wehrmacht garrison that had controlled Saint-Pierre since June 1940, that had requisitioned homes and food and imposed curfews and executed resistance, they were gone. The thunder grew louder. Marie's heart hammered with a hope she'd learned to suppress because hoping hurt too much when it was disappointed. The BBC broadcasts they'd listened to on hidden radios had spoken of Allied advances since D-Day in June, American and British forces pushing through Normandy, German resistance collapsing, liberation sweeping across France, village by village. But Saint-Pierre was small, insignificant, bypassed by major roads. Marie had assumed liberation would take months to reach them, if it came at all. The Germans might consolidate, counterattack, cling to every town. Hope was dangerous. Better to endure one more day at a time than break your heart expecting rescue. The sound resolved into distinct engines now. Tanks. Many tanks. Marie heard her neighbors stirring, shutters opening cautiously, voices whispering questions no one dared answer aloud because false hope was crueler than no hope at all. Then she saw them. American tanks rolling into the village square, their engines rumbling like mechanical heartbeats, announcing that France was breathing again. Stars painted on their sides, white stars on olive green, the most beautiful symbol Marie had ever seen. Soldiers riding on the tanks, rifles slung casually, looking tired but alert, scanning windows and rooftops for threats. Marie's hand flew to her mouth, her vision blurred with tears. 4 years. 4 years of occupation, of German soldiers in her streets, of fear and hunger, and watching neighbors disappear to Gestapo cells. 4 years of teaching Sophie to be quiet, to be invisible, to never speak about the hidden radio or the Jewish family they'd sheltered for 3 months before the resistance could move them. 4 years of surviving each day, while freedom felt like a fairy tale from a world that no longer existed. And now Americans, actual Americans from across the ocean, who'd fought through blood and fire to reach this insignificant French village, were here. Liberation wasn't coming. Liberation had arrived. Sophie woke, frightened by her mother's crying. "Mama? What's wrong?" "Nothing," Marie whispered, pulling her daughter to the window. Look at what's in our square." Sophie stared at the American tanks, at the soldiers dismounting, at the stars that represented everything the swastikas had stolen. Her eyes widened with childlike wonder, undiminished by 4 years of occupation. "Are they the Americans? The ones from your stories?" "Yes, mon amour. They're real. They're finally here." Below, more villagers were emerging cautiously from homes, standing in doorways, afraid this might be some cruel German trick. Then old Monsieur Beaumont, who'd been a soldier in the Great War, who'd watched Germans occupy Saint-Pierre twice in his lifetime, walked directly into the square, stood before the lead tank, saluted with tears streaming down his face. An American soldier jumped down from the tank, young enough to be Beaumont's grandson. He saluted back, then extended his hand. Beaumont clasped it, said something Marie couldn't hear, and the American soldier smiled. That smile, that simple, genuine smile from a liberator to a liberated, broke the dam. People flooded into the square, crying, laughing, shouting, "Hail to America!" and "Merci!" and "Liberté!" Church bells that had been silent for 4 years suddenly pealed, the sound rolling across the countryside, announcing to every French ear that one more village was free. Marie grabbed Sophie's hand. "Come. We must welcome them properly." The 4 years before. To understand what liberation meant to French civilians, one must first understand what occupation had stolen. The Germans entered Saint-Pierre on June 22, 1940, 2 days after France's armistice. They arrived in trucks and motorcycles, established headquarters in the mayor's office, posted proclamations in German and French, announcing that this village and everyone in it now belonged to the Greater German Reich. The occupation that followed was systematic erasure of French sovereignty. Curfews prevented civilians from moving freely in their own streets after 8 p.m. Radios were confiscated to prevent BBC listening. Food was requisitioned for German forces, leaving French families subsisting on rations that barely sustained life. The Gestapo established informant networks that made every neighbor potentially dangerous, every conversation potentially lethal. The Germans shot Monsieur Laurent, the schoolteacher, in the village square as warning against resistance. His crime? Teaching French history, emphasizing Republican values. His execution, witnessed by every villager the Germans forced to attend, demonstrated the price of maintaining French identity under occupation. The statistics documented systematic oppression. French civilians killed in reprisals during occupation, approximately 30,000. French sent to labor camps in Germany, over 600,000. Daily caloric ration for French civilians by 1944, averaging 1,200 calories, starvation level. Jewish French citizens deported from France, over 75,000, fewer than 3,000 survived. Villages destroyed in reprisals, over 600. But statistics couldn't capture what occupation meant psychologically. The daily humiliation of living in your own country under foreign control, watching your flag replaced with swastikas, hearing your language subordinated to German, knowing that any act of dignity or resistance could result in execution. Marie's husband, Jean, had disappeared in 1942. Gestapo officers had arrested him on suspicion of resistance activity. He'd been distributing underground newspapers, though they never found proof. Marie had never learned his fate officially. In 1944, a released prisoner told her Jean had died in Buchenwald, but she had no confirmation, no closure, just absence where her husband should be. She'd raised Sophie alone under occupation, maintaining routines that pretended normalcy while teaching her daughter to survive abnormality. Don't speak German, but understand it. Don't trust strangers, even children. Don't repeat anything you hear at home. Don't cry when Germans took their food. Don't react when neighbors disappeared. Just endure. Just survive until liberation came. If liberation came. By 1944, many French had stopped believing. The Allies had landed at D-Day, yes, but progress seemed slow. German propaganda insisted the invasion would be repelled. French civilians, exhausted by 4 years of occupation, afraid to hope for rescue that might never arrive, simply focused on surviving one more day. Then Americans started appearing in French villages, and everything changed. The Americans arrive. The American soldiers liberating Saint-Pierre were from the 4th Infantry Division, advancing through Normandy following the breakout from the beachhead. They'd been fighting continuously since D-Day, 2 months of combat that had hardened them but not eliminated their capacity for joy at seeing French civilians celebrating liberation. Sergeant James Miller, from Iowa, commanded the lead squad entering Saint-Pierre. He'd expected to clear the village under fire. Intelligence suggested German rearguards might defend even small towns. Instead, his squad entered without resistance and immediately found themselves surrounded by weeping French civilians trying to kiss them, shake their hands, shower them with flowers pulled from hidden gardens. "We weren't prepared for this," Miller wrote in a letter home 3 days later. "We've been fighting and dying since the beaches, losing guys every day. You get hard, stop thinking about anything except the next town, the next fight. Then we roll into Saint-Pierre, and these people, these skinny, tired, crying people, treat us like we're heroes. Old men saluting us, women bringing wine they'd hidden for 4 years, kids running alongside our tanks like it's a parade. It hit me that we're not just fighting to beat Germans. We're fighting to give these people their lives back." The Americans distributed rations immediately. Miller's squad carried K rations, C rations, chocolate bars, cigarettes, standard supplies that seemed like treasure to French civilians who'd been subsisting on occupation starvation rations. GIs opened ration boxes and handed them to any French person who approached, especially children. 8-year-old Sophie Dubois received her first Hershey bar from Private Tommy Rodriguez. She stared at it, uncertain what to do. Her mother had told stories about chocolate from before the war, but Sophie had never tasted it. Rodriguez unwrapped it, broke off a piece, and offered it. Sophie's eyes widened as the sweetness hit her tongue, an entire universe of flavor she'd never experienced. "Good?" Rodriguez asked in terrible French. Sophie nodded, speechless, clutching the chocolate like holy relic. Rodriguez laughed, ruffled her hair, and moved on to distribute more rations, unaware he'd just given a child her first tangible proof that the fairy tale of liberation her mother had whispered for 4 years was real. The flood of emotion. Liberation unleashed emotions. French civilians had suppressed for 4 years. Throughout the occupation, showing joy was dangerous. Germans viewed French happiness as defiance. Showing grief was dangerous. It suggested resistance sympathies. Showing anything except quiet, sullen compliance risked attracting fatal attention. For 4 years, French civilians had learned to present blank faces, while their souls burned with resentment and fear. Liberation broke that containment. People who'd maintained stoic facades for years suddenly couldn't stop crying. Men who'd survived occupation without breaking down now sobbed openly. Women clutched American soldiers and wouldn't let go, as if physical contact with liberators might prevent this dream from dissolving. Marie Dubois found herself clinging to an American medic, Corporal David Chen from San Francisco, trying to explain in broken English mixed with French that her husband was dead, that her daughter had lived her whole conscious life under occupation, that she'd stopped believing rescue would come, that seeing Americans in her village square felt like resurrection. Chen, who spoke no French, understood anyway. He'd seen this in other liberated villages. The desperate need to tell someone, anyone, what occupation had been like, to have witness to suffering that couldn't be contained any longer. He held Marie's hands, let her cry, and when she finally stopped, he gave her a clean handkerchief and 3 days' worth of rations for her family. "You're safe now," he said in English she didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear anyway. "You're safe." The church bells continued ringing. Monsieur Beaumont, who'd kept a French flag hidden in his attic for 4 years, brought it out and raised it on the flagpole in the village square. The sight of the tricolor flying where swastikas had hung made even the American soldiers pause. There was something profound about watching people reclaim symbols Germans had stolen, watching a nation remember it still existed. Someone found a gramophone and records that had been hidden. French music filled the square, songs that had been banned, melodies associated with Republican France that Germans had forbidden. People sang along, their voices rusty from 4 years of silence, but growing stronger with each verse. La Marseillaise rose from hundreds of throats, defiant and triumphant and heartbreaking all at once. The price that showed. As celebration continued, American soldiers began seeing the cost of occupation more clearly. Saint-Pierre showed physical damage. Buildings pocked with bullet holes, windows broken, infrastructure degraded by 4 years of German use and French inability to maintain it. But the human damage was worse. Children showed signs of prolonged malnutrition, thin limbs, distended bellies, hollow eyes. Adults looked older than their years, ground down by constant fear and inadequate food. Many villagers had visible scars from German brutality or resistance activities. The village cemetery had new graves, fresh enough to show deaths during occupation. Some marked with names, villagers who'd died from disease or starvation or old age accelerated by occupation stress. Others marked simply resistant. Resistance fighters whose real names couldn't be used because families feared German reprisal even in death. Lieutenant William Bradford, commanding the company liberating Saint-Pierre, wrote in his journal, "They're celebrating like we've won the war, but looking around, you see what they've lost. Empty houses where families were deported. Shops that can't open because there's nothing to sell. A whole generation of kids who've never known normal childhood. We drove the Germans out, but we can't give back the 4 years they took." American medics immediately established aid station, treating civilians alongside any military casualties. Malnutrition was universal. Many villagers had injuries from occupation, beatings, gunshot wounds, torture scars that had never received proper treatment. Some had diseases that had gone untreated for years because the Germans had requisitioned medical supplies. Corporal Chen treated a 12-year-old boy with a badly set broken arm, fractured during a German raid 6 months earlier, left to heal incorrectly because no doctor would risk treating resistance fighters' relatives. The boy had lived with constant pain, his arm functionally useless. Chen couldn't fix the old break, but provided pain medication and arranged for the boy to be evacuated to a field hospital where proper surgery might restore some function. "They suffered so we could get here," Chen told Sergeant Miller. "And we almost didn't make it in time. Look at them. They're starving, sick, traumatized. Another winter under German occupation might have killed half of them." The gratitude. French civilian gratitude toward American liberators was overwhelming and created complicated feelings among soldiers who'd simply been doing their jobs. The villagers of Saint-Pierre gave Americans everything they could, which wasn't much but represented sacrifice. Wine that had been hidden for 4 years, buried in gardens where Germans wouldn't find it. Bread baked from hoarded flour, flowers picked from secret gardens, eggs from chickens kept hidden in cellars. Marie Dubois insisted that Sergeant Miller and his squad come to her home for dinner. A feast by occupation standards, a meager meal by any other measure. She served wine, bread, a thin stew made with vegetables, and a rabbit someone had poached. It was the best meal she'd prepared in 4 years, using supplies she'd been saving for liberation that she'd half believed would never come. Miller felt uncomfortable accepting food from people who clearly had so little. But refusing seemed cruel. He and his men ate, shared their own rations to supplement the meal, and listened through the squad's French-speaking radioman to stories about occupation they couldn't fully comprehend. Sophie, emboldened by chocolate and liberation, showed the Americans her secret drawings, pictures of American soldiers she'd imagined based on her mother's whispered stories, drawn in hidden notebooks because Germans might interpret them as resistance. The soldiers leafed through pages of childish sketches showing Americans as almost mythical figures, larger than life, bringing flags and freedom. The contrast between Sophie's imagination and the reality of tired, dirty soldiers who happened to be liberating her village was stark and somehow moving. "She drew you like superheroes," the radio man translated. "We're just guys who got lucky to survive the beach," Miller said. "Nothing special." "To them, you're everything," the radio man replied. "4 years they've waited for this. You represent hope staying alive against impossible odds." Miller had no response to that. He was 23 years old, from a farm in Iowa, drafted into war he hadn't wanted. He'd survived D-Day through luck more than skill, fought through Normandy hedgerows watching friends die, and felt more survivor than hero. But looking at Sophie's drawings, at Marie's tears of gratitude, at the French flag flying in the square, he understood that liberation meant something far bigger than any individual soldier's experience. The sweep across France. Saint-Pierre's liberation was replicated in hundreds of villages and towns as American forces swept through France in late summer 1944. Each liberation followed similar patterns. American forces would enter, sometimes after fighting, sometimes finding Germans had already retreated. French civilians would emerge cautiously, afraid to hope, then erupt in celebration when they realized liberation was real. Flags would appear from hiding places. Church bells would ring. People would cry, sing, embrace soldiers, offer whatever they could spare. The emotional impact was consistent, overwhelming relief mixed with grief for what occupation had stolen. Some villages had lost significant percentages of their population to deportations, executions, or resistance activities. Some had been partially destroyed in fighting. All bore psychological scars from 4 years of living under foreign control that treated French people as conquered subjects rather than humans with rights. Paris's liberation on August 25, 1944, exemplified the scale. The city erupted in celebration so intense that American forces could barely move through streets packed with French civilians. General Charles de Gaulle led a victory march down the Champs-Élysées while hundreds of thousands cheered. The scenes were replayed in newspapers worldwide, proof that France, written off by many after 1940's defeat, still existed as a nation. But the intimate moments mattered as much as the grand ones. In village after village, American soldiers met French civilians who'd survived impossible circumstances. Young soldiers from America encountered old men who'd seen Germans occupy France twice in their lifetimes. Medics treated children who'd never known anything except occupation. Ordinary Americans became witnesses to suffering their own country had never experienced, and their presence became proof that democratic nations would fight to free those who'd lost freedom. The memory. For French civilians who lived through occupation and liberation, those experiences defined their understanding of freedom's fragility and value. Marie Dubois lived until 1994, 50 years after liberation. She never remarried, maintaining devotion to Jean's memory while raising Sophie alone. She taught history at the reopened school in Saint-Pierre, ensuring children who'd never known occupation understood what it had been like, what Americans had sacrificed to end it, and why freedom couldn't be taken for granted. Every August 17th, She attended commemoration services at Saint-Pierre's War Memorial, where the names of villagers killed during occupation were inscribed alongside those who died in combat. She'd stand with other survivors, now elderly, remembering the morning Americans had rolled into their square, remembering the sound of church bells, remembering the taste of hope after 4 years of swallowing fear. Sophie, who'd received her first chocolate from an American soldier, became a teacher like her mother, specializing in Franco-American relations. She wrote a memoir about growing up under occupation and experiencing liberation as a child, describing how Americans had represented not just military force, but human decency, how liberation hadn't been merely defeating Germans, but restoring belief that goodness could triumph over evil. The bond between France and America, forged in liberation, endured through decades of complicated geopolitics. When Americans questioned whether helping France had been worth the cost, over 200,000 American casualties in European theater, including many who died liberating French villages, French veterans of occupation would answer with their presence, their gratitude, and their memories of Americans who'd crossed an ocean to fight for other people's freedom. Liberation's meaning transcended military victory or political outcomes. It was about the moment when hope proved justified, when sacrifice demonstrated that some causes were worth dying for, when humans showed capacity for choosing right despite easier alternatives. For Marie, standing in Saint-Pierre's Square that August morning in 1944, watching American tanks roll past while villagers wept and church bells rang, the meaning was simpler and more profound. After 4 years of darkness, light had returned. After 4 years of foreign control, France belonged to French again. After 4 years of wondering if evil would win, goodness had proven itself stronger. She would carry that moment for 50 years, and when she died, Sophie would carry it forward, ensuring her own children knew the story of the morning. Americans came to Saint-Pierre and gave them back their country, their dignity, and their future. Liberation wasn't just about defeating occupiers. It was about restoring belief that the world contained people who'd risk everything to help strangers, that democracy meant something real enough to fight for, and that even when darkness seemed endless, dawn would eventually break. Carried on American tanks, brought by soldiers who'd crossed an ocean because freedom mattered more than safety, announced by church bells that had been silent too long, and finally rang again in celebration of liberation that had seemed impossible until it became real.